The largest single threat to our economy, and indeed to our way of life, is the nuclear activities on our neighbouring coast. There are almost weekly scandals at the Flamanville site with breaches of safety with the construction of the new nuclear facility. It's leaky, it's not safe. A recent drone stunt by Greenpeace showed how vulnerable it is to terrorist attack. There are shipments, transports of nuclear waste heading to Le Havre. This concentration on nuclear activities is such a threat that even the French government takes it seriously enough to widen the emergency radius where they have to provide protection, emergency army supplies to the population. Jersey falls within the radius, but because we're not France, they don't have to provide any protection for us. If anything went wrong, it would destroy our agriculture, tourism, finance, the economy. I oppose those nuclear activities. As for a work-life balance with the States, well, I spent many years working in the parish on a voluntary basis with the Roads Committee. Since becoming Procurator Banbury, the workload has increased, but I've juggled that with my public sector job. But obviously, if elected, I would be giving up that public sector post in order to devote myself to the necessary scrutiny of legislation and representing the people in the States, because that's what I believe is important.
Thank you,
I live in a dense residential development in the heart of St Helier in Gloucester Street. I don't have to count sheep at night, I can just count the number of restaurants and bars along the street, and I soon drop off, as you probably will by the end of this evening after these speeches. But that's the wonder of living in St Helier. You have the amenities. Hopefully we achieve the balance of residential development, jobs, a vibrant economy, all the shops, all the places you want to go, all the community. One of the problems about placing communities artificially out in the countryside, simply to disperse development, is it can lead to rural isolation. People without access to community, to the shops, to the facilities. The jobs are not out in the countryside, the jobs are in St Helier. When we talk about the economy of Jersey, really, we're talking about the economy of St Helier. So it will mean extra traffic coming in and out and impact on people's lives in St Helier. We can design and plan intelligently, provided we can plan sustainably. We need to know what the population will be. We need some predictability so we can plan those open spaces, plan those amenities, instead of trying to cram things in as quickly as possible as a quick fix solution. It's not a solution at all. Moving on to GST on food. There's always a difficulty with tax. There's no popular tax, except the tax somebody else pays. GST on food is undifferentiated. So it's the same on caviar as on carrots. Is it fair that the luxuries are not taxed? I don't think it is fair. Will taxing luxuries actually give us enough? Probably not. I'd put a tax on packaging.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, I'm not sure what I'm going to take to the States first, because there are so many things that I'd like to. But I do need to advise that we've had a bloodless coup, while it appears no one was paying a lot of attention, particularly States members. When I was a minister, ministers were in charge of their departments. Not even the chief minister could tell me how to run the department or what policies I should be instituting. P1 last year, P1 2018, changed all that, so there's only 2 accountable people in the States now, the chief minister and the chief executive officer. Everybody else doesn't really have any power at all. Only 2 people running this island. And by the way, the good thing about it is it's actually revealed what many of us know for a very long time, which is the island's run by the civil service. You all think the States Assembly is the government, but it's now virtually the most neutered government. Well, it is. It's the most neutered government we've ever had. And there's only two people at the top, and one of them relies on the other one as his principal advisor. So you tell me who's running the show. In cheek, I've got to spend a bit of time on Bridge to France because this came up when I was a minister, and I had to go to France just after the President of the Chamber of Commerce had written to the President of France putting this scheme forward. And I had to go over and explain this wasn't state's policy. However, it is of course achievable. Anything engineering is achievable if you spend a lot of money on it. I would estimate if we wanted to do it, and we have to have a tunnel by the way to let the shipping through, unless you build a very high bridge, you're probably looking at about 20 billion. Well, we just don't have that sort of money. It may happen one day, and it'll be very nice for us to commute to France, providing it doesn't mean we get millions of immigrants coming in the bridge and going the other way. That will probably be the issue, but it is actually doable. And bizarrely, when I was over, the French said, well, yes, you can bring it to France, we won't stop you, but we're not paying for it. So I would say, let's just have a ferry. It's cheaper.
Thank you much for your question. What I find quite alarming about our current government is its clear lack of common sense. Now, let's have a look at the issue that the Chief Minister, he pulled immigration from the States to be debated 1 month after he was elected. So if we're looking at what we should be debating first and foremost, the next census for the island census is supposed to be taking place in 2021, and we are going to be discussing and creating our island plan next year. Now, the problem we have at the moment is the government's inability to establish the exact number of people we actually have living on the island. And how do they intend to plan the future requirements of the hospital, housing, schools, social contributions, roads, sewage, and most importantly, the island plan, which will legally dictate this island for the next 10 years if we don't actually know how many people are actually living here. So the first thing I would be asking for if I was to be elected is that the census be brought forward, and certainly with the discussions on the new island plan. That would just be a common sense approach which would then dictate everything else, the knock-on effect of everything else on this island. In terms of a bridge, whilst I don't believe it's feasible and financially feasible at all, I don't think anybody should be denigrating anybody for the ideas. We should be embracing people that are coming up with new and inventive ideas to regenerate this island, as mad as some of them might be, or as fantastically feasible some of them might be. I don't believe a bridge at this juncture, in terms of where we are financially, is viable, but certainly I think we should be encouraging people with coming up with some innovative ideas for our island. So, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Single threat to the Jersey economy. Putting resources into education is the only investment that is guaranteed to pay off. That's because it is an investment in our own future. How would you give your time as deputy around work and family life? Space, environment, population, elderly or more, yes, and disabled, and campaigner, and family, yes.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, well, unfortunately, the current island plan makes it clear that we need to protect our countryside and build more in St. Helier. My personal view, it should be balanced. Now, how can I see I can take it forward from my personal, because there are lots of people, there is island plan, and obviously I cannot fight with them all this island plan, even I think 5-6 people cannot fight this island plan. Saying this, I've been involved recently in help as a member of First Tower Committee. I was involved recently with the new development that Dandara wanted to do on the top of Tower Road coming down. I met with the residents. I gave them some facilitating some questions how to negotiate. At the end of the day, it was a long process, but now Dandara needs to review their plans. They need to lower it. Also, I've suggested, and I hope it will come in the recent plan, to have a common area, like a small park or garden that will connect between old development and the new development. It means that if we have, what I can promise from my side, if any development will be done in District 3 and 4, especially in the Green Hills from up the hill, we have more green hills. I would be heavily involved and try to reduce the impact as much as possible, and I'll be on site of the residents. We do need to keep our green spaces, we do need to keep community spaces, and I realize that it will be flats in St. Helier, it will probably not be houses, and we, like I said, we can use office blocks, we can use buildings that are unused by the state. There is lots of things can be done. From my point of view, for the residents 3 and 4, I will be on board to helping them like I've been with Tower Road. Regarding GST, I never agreed on GST of food. I think GST on food should be taken. I know that we need to increase tax and we need to be, I can answer also online. Please look at my Facebook.
Thank you very much.
I'll deal with the bridge first. Fabulous idea, love it. Unfortunately, it's a pipe dream. We can't afford it. So, maybe in another 100 years' time. If I was in the States now, I would be supporting Russell Babbie. I've worked very hard on the hospital. I mentioned in my opening speech. I've spent many days at the hospital inquiry and at the hospital forums. But because I'm not in the States, what I have done, I've taken action. And on Monday I wrote a 3-page letter with 14 action points of why we don't need Gloucester Street. I gave that with some other items which I'll tell you about to all of the state members. I gave them an example of a hospital up in Scotland which serves 150,000 people, 344 beds. It was built in 2.5 years and it cost £212 million, about half the cost of what we're proposing. So, what they're trying to do at the moment is crazy. And if I was in there now, that's what I'd be working on. But I'm not. But if I got in, the hospital would be moving on, I hope. And what I'd like to do is sit down with John Young and separate the environment from planning. And that's something John Young wants to do. The environment in Jersey really doesn't get looked after. It's a second thought. The previous environment minister was the guy that thought glyphosate was no worse than a glass of red wine. I mean, the guy's crazy. I don't know if you're aware, there are some huge dangers at the moment on this planet, and it applies to Jersey as well. We've seen the problem of the sea lettuce, which is the pollution of the nitrates washing into the bay, and with the sea lettuce bloom. We've seen 3 reservoirs poisoned. At the moment, if you were to Google plummeting insect numbers, there's a huge worldwide loss of insects right across the planet, and that is tied to the agricultural production of food worldwide and the intense amount of fertilisers that we put on. So yes, I'd like to separate the environment from planning.
Thank you, John. All right,
I wouldn't adjust GST for food. Reason being, if you take that out of the equation, the chances are that the remainder of GST will go from 5% to 10%, because the State Assembly will want to maintain incomes. It's also easily forgotten that when it was introduced, the income tax allowances were raised by something like £3,500 to compensate lower income families precisely for the fact that GST will be charged on food. And that compensation still exists and increases from time to time. It's also a tax that you can't get out of. Rich people have found all sorts of ways of reducing their income tax, but when they buy an unbelievably expensive car for £200,000, they have to pay the GST. It's also the only tax that you have personal control over. You decide what you spend and how much you spend. And I think that's an important thing. Whereas income tax, the income tax department simply goes, thank you very much, we'll take 20% out of your wallet, no arguments. As for building St. Helier, I regret to advise that is the current policy. I don't see this government making any headway on immigration or population control, so we can bank on requiring new residential accommodation. It needs to be remembered that the new financial quarter, the idea behind that was it would free up what used to be residential homes at the north end of town that work and became offices. Now we can reverse that trend. But I have to say, and one of the reasons I am standing is I think that St. Helier number 3 is under great threat because the island plan is due to be reviewed, and I think we're going to see a big showdown between building development and preserving Jersey as we know it. You've got a lot of green fields in this district, and I want make sure they stay green.
Single threat to the Jersey economy. Putting resources into education is the only investment that is guaranteed to pay off. That's because it is an investment in our own future. How would you give your time as deputy around work and family life? Space, environment, population, elderly or more, yes, and disabled, and campaigner, and family, yes.